Well, hello, students. Here we are in chapter 3, and it's really interesting here because in this particular chapter, we are talking about mutual engagement and shared diagnosis. So, the point is, what happens when we try to implement change and it doesn't work? We spend time putting together an organizational mission based on a vision that we really thought was strategically sound. And then we find out that somewhere along the road that things changed and we are not as profitable as we might like to be. We aren't growing as fast as we might like to be growing. And there is competition right up our sleeves trying to get a hold of our business. And when we do a SWOT analysis on our company, it's very interesting. We look for internally, are we able to meet our competitors? And, we examine our strengths and our weaknesses. And a lot of our opportunities now turn into threats. So, just like when you have to go to the doctor when you don't feel good, when the organization isn't feeling good, when the culture is hurting, when leadership is faltering, we have to diagnose the problem. And a lot of this does go back to Kurt Lewin's freezing and unfreezing. And we, in this chapter, are going to take a good look at what's going on with our company by sharing some of the objectives here of this particular chapter. So, to initiate change, we need to, as leaders, unfreeze. And we look at our groups, our departments, and how we do things throughout the chain in the company by looking at our social habits, and by creating a sense of dissatisfaction within the status quo. And to do that, in order to implement effective organizational change, we need to go through every one of our strategic goals, put them on a time value line, and to see whether or not each one of those goals can be met with the resources that we have, internally and externally. So we need to change basically in our leadership roles how we communicate with the status quo. And we need what is identified as strategic renewal. And in order to get that strategic renewal, we need to know what the requirements are for effective implementation before we refreeze. So this is in the stages of diagnosis right now. So that's what we're going to concentrate. So essentially, what we got to do is identify where the virus is. And in order to identify that, we have to create an atmosphere of discomfort, so to speak, in order to reach the proper diagnosis to assess how we go forward. And that, I think, is really extremely important here. So, in talking about that a little bit, all right, we really want to take a look at, in the diagnosis, behaviors. and values. And what type of a systematic framework are we going to need to truly diagnose the resources that are not working and the resources that are going to be needed to make the framework come to fruition? And what communication, and this is key, and this is one of the objectives of this chapter, to explore ways to overcome the climate of silence. That means that employees aren't speaking up. When things go wrong, they don't necessarily know what they need to do to correct something, so they keep silent. So our leaders need to know how to address this, to get people to open up a little bit more, to create a climate of open dialogue. So strong leaders have the ability to implement what we refer to as diagnostic intervention. How can they intervene while they're diagnosing situations that aren't working so that employees will open up to them? And finally, after we figure out what the problem is, how do we create a learning environment before we refreeze and then make the necessary and needed improvements? Okay, so that's where we're going this week. And as we go through each part of the diagnosis, you'll be able to see how this unfolds.